If you're anything like us, you probably feel a bit, well, swamped by all the economic headlines lately.
Hmm.
It's inflation one day, growth the next, then interest rates. And underneath it all, there's this nagging feeling that the UK economy is just kind of stuck.
Yeah, stuck is a word you hear a lot.
It really is. And it's a lot to get your head around, isn't it? It makes
Yeah,
you wonder what's really going on beneath all the noise.
absolutely.
And that's exactly why we're doing this deep dive. We want to take all this excellent material you provided us and really cut through that noise, extract the essential insights, make sense of how it all connects so you get a clear picture of what's actually shaping things.
That's the plan. And you're right. The UK economy, looking at it now in 2025, it is undeniably complex. We're seeing a very slow recovery, and it's really been hampered by, well, a whole series of major shocks hitting one after another.
So that stuck feeling people have,
Hmm.
it's not just a feeling, is it? Do the actual numbers, the data in our sources, do they back that up? That sense the economy's stuck in low gear?
Oh, they absolutely do. Yeah. When you really dig into the data, it paints a clear picture. It shows this combination of specific overlapping problems that feed into that feeling.
Like what specifically?
Well, you've got inflation that's been stubbornly high, even if it's come down a bit. Then there's very weak economic growth. And of course, the ongoing cost of living crisis, which is, really squeezing households, hitting their spending power directly. And then you layer on top the sort of longer term effects of Brexit, which are still playing out. Add in all the global instability, wars, the energy price shocks, supply chain issues that haven't fully gone away.
Right.
And finally, something people see every day. Real visible strain on public services. The NHS, schools, transport. It all adds up. It's not just one thing. It's a multi-layered challenge.
Okay, so knowing that's the complex backdrop, how do economists actually, take the temperature of the economy? What are the key dials they're looking at?
Right, so there are a few core indicators they track, and the materials lay these out really well. First up is GDP, gross domestic product.
Okay.
That's basically the total value of everything produced in the country.
Yeah.
Think of it like the size of the whole economic cake.
Got it. And how's that looking?
Well, for 2024, the UK's growth is looking really low, around 0.3%. Now, the crucial insight here, the thing the sources really highlight, is that this number barely keeps up with population growth.
Ah, so per person.
Exactly. Per person, prosperity isn't really growing. It's sort of flatlining. It's like a silent squeeze on individual wealth, even if the headline number looks small but positive.
Wow, okay. So not just slow, almost stagnant for individuals. What about prices, inflation?
Yeah, so the inflation rate, that tells us how fast prices are going up. Now, it has fallen from that really painful peak of 11% back in 2022,
Thank goodness for that.
right? But it's still hovering around, say, 3 to 4% in 2024. And for an economy aiming for stability, that's still considered pretty high. You feel that in your weekly shop, right?
Definitely, and jobs.
Mhm.
Unemployment.
The unemployment rate, that's the percentage of people looking for work who can't find it. It's currently about 4.2%. Now, on the surface, that sounds low.
Historically low, almost?
Yeah, compared to some periods. But the sources describe the job market as fragile. That low number might hide issues with the quality of work, or job security maybe isn't as strong as it looks.
Right, so maybe enough jobs quantity-wise, but the quality, what those jobs actually let you buy, that might be the real pinch point. How does that stack up when you compare wages and prices?
That is such a crucial point, and it leads us straight to wage growth versus inflation. This is the critical bit. Are people's incomes rising faster than the cost of living?
The million-dollar question, or maybe the 50 pence question these days.
Exactly. And for a lot of people in the UK, the sources are pretty clear. Real wages actually fell. Their pay packets didn't keep up with rising prices, so their purchasing power went down.
Ouch.
Yeah. Then there's the interest rate. That's the cost of borrowing money set by the Bank of England. It's currently up around 5.25%. That's high.
And for you, the listener, what does that high rate actually mean?
It means things like your mortgage payments could be significantly higher if you're remortgaging. Credit card interest is higher. And for businesses, it makes it more expensive to borrow money to invest and expand. It acts like a brake.
Okay. And then there's this term, productivity. It sounds a bit dry, maybe a bit academic, but it seems like it's actually really important.
Oh, it's absolutely fundamental. Not dry at all when you see the effects. Productivity is basically how much output we get per worker, per hour worked. And it's the bedrock of a country's wealth.
And the UK.
The UK is lagging, noticeably behind places like the US and Germany. If your economy is less productive, it means there's less scope for wages to rise sustainably, businesses are less competitive internationally, and ultimately, living standards improve more slowly. It holds everything back.
Right. And one last one you mentioned?
Public debt. That's the total amount the government has borrowed over time. It's currently sitting at over 100% of GDP. That's a big number.
And that means,
It means a significant chunk of taxpayer money has to go just to pay the interest on that debt, which could potentially, crowd out spending on other things, like those public services we mentioned.
okay, wow. So those numbers definitely paint that challenging picture we talked about. Slow growth, prices still high, wages squeezed. But just knowing what's happening isn't the whole story, is it?
No, not at all.
The really crucial part is understanding why. What are the big underlying factors, according to the sources, that are actually driving all these numbers? This is where it gets really interesting, I think. Let's look at the key factors shaping this landscape.
Exactly. And the material you gave us identifies 6 really core drivers here. First, and it's definitely described as a long-term drag, are the ongoing Brexit effects.
Still a major factor, then.
Oh, yes. The data shows a clear drop in trade with the EU, which is still, the UK's biggest trading partner by far. But it's not just trade volume. There are these persistent labor shortages, the sources mention, in really key sectors like hospitality, farming, healthcare. Plus, businesses are dealing with more red tape, more checks on stuff they export or import.
Making things slower and more expensive.
Precisely. And there's also evidence of a slowdown in investment coming into the UK from international companies. What's really telling is when you compare.
How so?
Well, the sources point out that countries like Germany and France saw their exports bounce back much faster after the COVID dip. And the UK's overall trade intensity, that's exports plus imports, measured against the size of the economy, that's fallen quite a bit since Brexit. It's not a small adjustment. It's a significant shift with real economic weight.
Okay. And then moving from trade to something everyone's felt very directly in their pockets, the cost of living crisis.
Absolutely inescapable, this one. It's been driven mainly by those huge spikes in energy prices, especially after the war in Ukraine kicked off, and also really stubborn food inflation.
Right, the supermarket bills.
Exactly. And then on top of that, you've got housing costs, rents, and mortgage payments, for many rising much faster than wages. It's a double whammy.
Yeah.
And remember, the energy price guarantee ended. That particularly hit lower-income households hard. But the overall effect is crystal clear. Families have less money left over after essentials, less disposable income.
Which means less spending in shops, restaurants.
Precisely. Less consumer spending, which directly slows down the whole economy. It's like putting the brakes on demand.
And the Bank of England saw all that inflation and reacted, right? By hiking interest rates.
Yep.
Which then caused its own set of problems.
Exactly. They had to act to try and cool down that inflation, so they raised rates quite aggressively. But the direct consequence for homeowners, especially those needing to remortgage, was often hundreds of pounds added to their monthly bills. A huge shock for many.
Yeah, I bet.
And it wasn't just homeowners. It made borrowing more expensive for businesses, too. So maybe they put off buying that new machine or expanding. It slowed down investment.
It's interesting. You mentioned the U.S. earlier. Did they handle it differently?
Well, the U.S. also raised rates significantly, but their inflation seemed to cool down a bit faster. The sources suggest a couple of reasons. Maybe stronger productivity growth over there, and crucially, their relative energy independence because of shale gas. That shielded them a bit from the worst of the global energy price shocks that hit Europe so hard.
Okay, that makes sense. So productivity, again, it really does sound like this silent anchor dragging on the UK economy, affecting everything from inflation responses to our wages. What do the sources say about why it's such a persistent problem here?
You've really put your finger on a central issue there. What comes through so clearly from the analysis is that low productivity is a massive ongoing headache for the UK.
Just not getting enough bang for our buck work-wise.
Essentially, yes. UK workers, on average, produce less economic value per hour worked compared to their peers in the US or Germany. It's quite a gap.
And why is that? Is it people not working hard enough?
No, it's generally not about individual effort. The root causes identified in the materials point to a more systemic lack of investment over many years.
Investment in what?
Across the board, really. Investment in modern infrastructure transport, digital networks, investment in education and skills training, ensuring the workforce has the right capabilities, and critically, investment in technology and automation within businesses.
Ah, so giving workers the better tools to do the job.
Exactly. There's a vivid example mentioned. Think about the average German factory worker. They are likely supported by significantly more automation, more advanced machinery, and potentially better vocational training than their UK counterpart. That creates a real competitive disadvantage for UK PHAV. It's a deep structural issue.
And that lack of investment, it feels like it extends beyond factories, doesn't it? Our public services feel like they're really creaking at the seams.
They absolutely are, and the sources don't mince words here. Public services under pressure. That's not just a slogan. It's the lived reality. You see it in the huge NHS waiting lists, the struggles to recruit and retain teachers, the strikes we've seen across rail, health, education.
Yeah, it feels constant.
And it's this toxic mix, really.
Yeah.
Years of maybe underfunding, combined with the pressures of an aging population which naturally needs more health and social care. All this puts immense strain on government budgets.
So people feel they're paying high taxes but not seeing the results.
That's exactly the sentiment many people express. And think about the economic impact, too. If your workforce isn't healthy because they can't get timely treatment, or if the next generation isn't getting the best possible education, that directly feeds back into lower productivity down the line. It's all interconnected.
Definitely. And there's one more major pressure point. You mentioned housing.
Yes, the housing crisis. This is fundamental. At its heart, it's a supply problem. For decades, the UK simply hasn't built enough homes, particularly affordable homes, to keep up with demand.
So basic economics, high demand, low supply.
Equals sky-high prices and soaring rents.
Okay.
Exactly. And this hits first-time buyers and renters the hardest, locking many people out of secure housing or forcing them to spend a huge chunk of their income just on keeping a roof over their heads.
Is this uniquely a UK problem?
Well, many countries have housing pressures, but the scale seems particularly acute here. There's a really striking fact in the source material. The UK builds dramatically fewer new homes per person each year, compared to other developed nations like, say, Canada or Australia.
Really? That is striking.
It suggests there's something systemic, maybe even uniquely British, holding back construction and affordability, going beyond just simple market ups and downs.
Okay, so we've unpacked the current state, the metrics, and these really deep-seated driving factors. Brexit, cost of living, low productivity, strained services, the housing crisis. That's quite a list. Given all that, where do we go from here? What do the sources suggest might happen next for the UK economy?
Well, the materials essentially lay out two quite distinct potential paths, two future scenarios.
Yeah.
And they really frame it as the UK being at a crossroads.
Okay, what's the first path? The more positive one, perhaps.
That's the optimistic scenario. But, and it's a big but, it really hinges on significant, deliberate policy changes and reforms.
What kind of reforms?
It involves the government making some serious strategic investments. Things like boosting green energy development, really getting behind AI adoption, upgrading critical infrastructure. It also relies on forging new, effective trade deals, maybe with that CPTPP bloc in the Pacific, or with India, to help exports recover and diversify trade away from just the EU.
So proactive steps.
Very proactive.
Yeah.
And crucially, this scenario includes labor market reforms specifically designed to tackle that productivity problem we talked about. Plus, success in getting inflation properly under control, allowing the Bank of England to gradually lower interest rates again, and importantly, a major push to ramp up house building.
And if all that happens,
the result, according to this optimistic view, would be a gradual but noticeable improvement, starting maybe around 2026 to 2028. Better growth figures, real wages starting to climb again, and importantly, a recovery in public confidence.
okay, that sounds achievable, but definitely requires a lot of things to go right and a lot of political will. What's the alternative? The less rosy picture.
That's the pessimistic scenario. This basically assumes things continue more or less on their current trajectory. So no major reforms are enacted. Maybe there are more unexpected global shocks, another energy crisis perhaps, or a food price surge.
Right.
In this future, productivity stays low. Business investment remains weak because of uncertainty or costs. Inflation might flare up again. Housing becomes even more unaffordable. And the pressure from the national debt could force the government into making deeper cuts to spending.
Leading to even worse public services.
Exactly. The outcome here is pretty bleak. Prolonged economic stagnation, maybe more social and political unrest because of inequality and frustration, and the gap between the haves and have-nots widening further.
A pretty stark contrast between those two potential futures. So putting the UK in context, how does our situation look when you compare it globally? Are other big economies facing the same kind of perfect storm, or are they charting a different course?
That global comparison is really useful, and the sources offer some quick, sharp contrasts. Take the USA. They generally have a stronger growth outlook right now. Inflation came down relatively quickly, the investment climate is seen as pretty robust, and they benefit from high trade openness and, as we mentioned, that domestic energy production.
Okay, so doing relatively better. What about closer to home, like Germany?
Germany's interesting. They're actually experiencing quite weak growth at the moment, some similar pressures perhaps.
Hmm.
But they tend to have stable inflation control, still benefit from that high productivity base, especially manufacturing, and remain very, very open to international trade.
Right. And the UK in comparison.
The UK, as we've discussed, is characterized by that lagging growth, inflation that's improving but slowly, a somewhat fragile investment climate, and that noticeable drop in trade openness since Brexit. It stands out on that last point particularly.
And further afield, places like India.
Well, economies like India are on a completely different trajectory. You're seeing very fast growth there, though inflation is moderate. They're attracting a huge amount of foreign investment, expanding trade rapidly. It's a different dynamic altogether, driven by demographics and development.
So it really highlights how different countries have their own unique mix of strengths and weaknesses, doesn't it?
Absolutely. What works in one place or what holds one place back isn't necessarily the same elsewhere. Economic success isn't a one-size-fits-all recipe. So look, boiling it all down, what's abundantly clear from all this material is that the UK economy really is standing at a crossroads right now.
Yeah, that comes through strongly.
Those years of overlapping shocks we talked about, Brexit, then COVID, then the massive inflation surge, they've undeniably taken a heavy toll. They've created this widespread feeling of being, well, stuck.
Mm-hmm.
But importantly, the analysis also suggests that a path forward does exist, not predetermined failure. But it relies on making smart choices, targeted investment, decisive policy reforms, and finding the right way to engage with the global economy again.
Which leaves us and you, our listener, with a really significant question to think about, doesn't it? Faced with these challenges and these potential paths forward. Will the UK choose a path of just trying to survive, to muddle through, or will it make the strategic adaptations needed to actually thrive in what is clearly a new and rapidly changing global economic landscape? Something to mull over.